Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we have Manvir Singh, author of the book Shamanism, the Timeless Religion that came out earlier this year. How are you doing today, Manvir?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is it's an exciting book to discuss with you, and excited to dig in and get into some fun nuance and um hopefully help folks in this psychedelic ecosystem understand shamanism as a term and as a thing a little bit better. Um, you know, I think let's just take a moment. Can you explain like what high level is your book, and then I have like one or two questions.
Yeah, for sure. So, the big thesis of the book is that shamanism is not a tradition that is confined to like remote or far off or archaic societies. Shamanism really, like in
Mm,
the popular discourse, carries this like primitivist imagery, and the argument is that shamanism is much more timeless, much more perennial. That it would probably characterize very early religion, but it manifests in the world around us today, and I think it will perennially reemerge. That it is a hyper compelling means of dealing with uncertainty that humans just recreate over and over in myriad forms.
yeah, I love that. I can't wait to get into it more. And what the popular narrative in psychedelics is don't call yourself a shaman. But then we have to like understand what are we actually saying? Because this isn't like an Amazonian term or a Mexican term. This is like a Russian term, like deep Siberian term that kind of I don't know who the first anthropologists are, but you probably studied that a little bit. But we were seeing characteristics like soul flight, things that looked like magic. Are there kind of like classic categories of what is shamanism? Like, what are the features of it?
Yeah, so I mean that is like an incredibly debated thing. I think
Hmm.
the image that is very popular is this one developed by this Romanian historian, Mircea Eliade, who wrote this book. It came out in English, I think, in 1964, Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. And he argued that shamanism has this paradigmatic form in Siberia and then it exists in all these other places. And the key features for him were soul journeying, this idea that your soul leaves your body, a tripartite cosmology. So there's an upper world, there's a lower world. Your soul goes into these different like worlds to engage with gods, spirits, whatever. And then he saw key features like fire, flight. Um, but the tricky thing about Eliade that we now recognize is that his scheme doesn't apply cross culturally, let alone to Siberia. I mean, even if you look at the groups from where the word shaman comes from, they understood these ecstatic states in much more kind of diverse and fluid ways. They understood, yes, sometimes soul journeying, but also possession. Sometimes understanding that like a spirit is next to you and you're speaking to them. And so the definition that I prefer, which I think um, is more justifiable is on the basis of three traits. First, some kind of non-ordinary state. So the specialist enters, it's been called trance or ecstasy, altered states of consciousness, but some state, some behavioral or psychological state that is foreign from normal human functioning. Two, engagement with unseen beings or realities, gods, ghosts, witches, ancestors. And then three, services like healing and divination.
Mm,
Um, and I think, when we look to the various traditions that have been called shamanic, Amazonian shamanism, Korean shamanism, what you see across Siberia in Indonesia, it like if you want to find out what is common among the things that seem to people to be shamanic, I think those are the only three that they all really fundamentally share. But I think they're really important.
so non-ordinary states, services, and then unseen, some sort of interaction with the unseen world,
Yes,
right?
yes. And then you
Yeah.
have a lot of things that are often associated with that, dramatic initiations, music. But I think of these three as kind of the beating heart, the core of shamanism.
Yeah. Right, because sometimes people fall into it. That's really interesting. Cool. So let's rewind the tape. Um, how did you end up studying anthropology and then picking something like shamanism to dig into?
Yeah, how did I end up in anthropology? So I I am and grew up like a big animal nerd and a big mythology nerd. And in college, really shifted into studying animal behavior and slowly was like excited about using this like very rigorous framework that I had learned to study animals, especially like evolutionary theory, was excited to use that to study human behavior and everything I found like puzzling and interesting and intriguing about humans, myth, magic, morality, religion. And so in short, I started my PhD and I decided I wanted to do field work, that I wanted to like go to a place, live with a community, and really study their culture in depth. And I was very interested in indigenous religion and indigenous law and justice. And I ended up deciding just for that first summer to go visit a community called the Mentawai. These Mentawai people, they live off the west coast of Sumatra. So there's an island chain. It's called the Mentawai Archipelago. Some of your listeners might know it as like a really great surf spot. It's like one of the best spots in the world to surf because it's all the way on the edge of the Indian Ocean. So you have these swells that build up and then break on the island chain. But anyway, um, in addition to being an amazing spot for surfing, it's the home of these indigenous people, the Mentawai. Um, and I arrived there, and before going there, I knew that they had what people would sometimes describe as shamanism. So, like, if you Google Mentawai people, you'll see pictures of people in loincloths, and you'll sometimes see these images of specific individuals whose bodies are tattooed. So I had some association, like I knew there was something shamanic there, and I think like a lot of people, I had this just general intrigue in the term shamanism and the idea exactly. So these are these are some Mentawai people, and all of these are actually sikere, or these are shamans. I'm pretty sure. I think I know at least one of these guys.
Oh wow.
Um, but so I arrive in Mentawai, and immediately on my first day, I meet someone, and I think he was the second guy from the left over there. I meet him within a couple of hours. I talk about it in the book. I like just end up in this situation. But pretty quickly I see how important these figures are in Mentawai society. These individuals called sikere, and they're really salient. They're really striking. First, they're just like super visually striking, and you could see that their bodies are tattooed. They still wear loincloths. The Mentawai have adopted clothes, but they still wear loincloths. They grow out their hair. During ceremonies, they dress their bodies in turmeric, so they rub their bodies so they're all yellow. They put on leaves. They put on bells. Um, so they're very visually striking, but then they're also like really important social pillars. They're at like the nexus of religious life, of medicinal life, of political life, of ritual life. Um, and I was just like very intrigued. Like I would see from afar, there would be these shamanic healing ceremonies. You would hear bells. I would see children kind of pretending to be shamans, doing shaman dances. We would stay with these shamans. They're called sikere, and sometimes at night they would sing. They would sing their shaman songs, and they're incredibly beautiful and kind of haunting. They're like sometimes they're usually songs to communicate with souls and spirits. And so that first summer, it was 2 months, and I just had like a glimpse of this tradition, but I was incredibly enchanted and fascinated and like wanted to learn more. And I came back. I was doing a PhD at Harvard, so I came back for my second year, and that's when I read this book by Eliade, this Romanian historian. And then I realized that there's this incredible literature, this deep anthropological history, and that a lot of what I found really intriguing and striking and evocative with the Mentawai actually has these really curious echoes and parallels outside of it. And then I came to really study it more in depth, and now that was a decade ago, and I still I've spent more than like 14 months at this point with the Mentawai. I've lived with shamans. I've done a lot of research there, but then I've also done research in other places in the Orinoco. So that summer really kind of jump started this interest.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I'm glad to know that you kind of got that much immersion with a culture like that. That's like really fascinating. Just want to show people the cover of your book here. Um, who published this one?
This is Knopf, so it's
Great,
a part of Penguin
awesome.
Random House.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. So,
Thanks.
um, and then I imagine things kind of took a life of their own to some degree, where you're like, what is this, and how do I kind of do some sort of cross-cultural analysis, and like what is this thing, shamanism? Is that kind of how it went for you?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, immediately, even that first summer, I was like, So I grew up in New Jersey. My family is from India, but I'm very, Western in a lot of my worldviews, and so I'm looking for like an analogy. How do I understand these figures? Are they like doctors? Are they like priests? And I came back and I was reading up more on them, and something that really intrigued me was like the taboos that the Sikhere observe. So the Sikhere are really um respected as sources of ritual knowledge and taboo knowledge and religion, and yet the religious system seems to really disadvantage them. They have all of these taboos. They can't have sex a lot of the time. They can't eat a lot of the best foods, eels, certain monkeys, certain fish. um, and in all honesty, I was just like, why? Like, incredibly intrigued by this. Why is it that these individuals seem to have so much power and prestige and influence, and yet the system that they can influence? I mean, I have kind of uh, um, I think humans are self-interested. I think they're great, but I think like a lot of humans, if they had control, they would use it to benefit themselves. And so I really started to study the taboo in depth.
Mm,
And it was through studying the taboo that I came to understand something really fundamental about Mentawe shamanism, but also shamanism around the world, which is how fundamental otherness is. And so studying the taboos and
as the
studying just,
shaman being other.
yeah, the shaman being other. And so, like, now how I understand a lot of shamanism is the cultivation of otherness. And I think about that
Mhm.
happening on two stages. So, first, there's kind of like the essence of the shaman transforms. That you look at a lot of shamanic initiations across cultures, and what's really central to a lot of them is the sense that this individual has become a different kind of human. We took them into the desert, we cut open their body, we put crystals inside. They died and they came back to life. We have worked on their eyes with magical substances so that now they can see gods and ghosts. Or there's a in some parts of Africa, they'll take them into a tent and they'll kill a dog and they'll say we replace their eyes with a dog's eyes. But then in a lot of them, there's also deprivation. That to become
Mm,
this kind of specialist, you have to deny yourself food, you have to deny yourself sex, you have to deny yourself social contact. And I think all of these promote this sense for the community, but also for the practitioner themselves, that they are a different kind of human, and that and thus kind of more credibly endowed with the powers to engage with the beyond. So that is one
mm,
form of otherness. And then I think about the other form of otherness as in the moment, which is the ecstasy, the altered state. And as an example, you might come to me and you might say, or I might come to you and I said, Joe, I know that you really want rain lately, and I can talk to some rain goddess. You would say, like, you're just a regular human. Like, what makes you special? And yes, maybe I had died and come back to life. Maybe I have a new skeleton, and that might promote some sense of credibility. Um, but if in the moment, you can imagine two scenarios. One, I'm like, rain goddess, like, come and change the rain. And then another where I lose consciousness and I see a rain goddess and my mouth is frothing and I forget the moment afterwards. I think there's something so experientially powerful, both for the community and for the practitioner, of the altered state as a demonstration that this person is doing something normal humans cannot. And so that
mm.
really, through just like starting to think about taboos, I really came to understand otherness as this really fundamental thing for what the shamans are cultivating, both in the moment and essentially. Do you know what I mean?
So, right, they need to be something. They need to present as something useful, special, maybe, in order that they can deploy these services that they're offering, right? And religious or otherwise, it sounds like. And um, the otherness, the taboo isn't necessary. The taboos and like I guess restrictions on behaviors and diets and whatnot is like a thing that can elevate that. Like one
Yeah.
way I've seen it worldwide is kind of like these spirits aren't going to interact with us in the ways we want unless we're ritually pure enough in these ways. Is that part of it, or is that different? Or
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I think that intuition manifests in different ways. So, I mean, in Mentale, this is maybe this might seem like a slightly different example, but if you want to practice really like malicious magic, I want to attack someone, there's a sense that I have to deprive myself food and sex for several days. Um, to almost to like force the spirits to work for me.
Mm.
That if someone hurt me, then I can much more easily use black magic. But if I really want to do it more intensely, um, but I think there's also this sense. There's often the sense of like, and you see this like in Christian stories about asceticism in the desert, that through denying yourself and going to the wilderness, you can, by going to the edge, you can become something different, and align yourself more with the supernatural world.
Mm.
um
Hmm. Hmm.
and again, I think of the self-denial as just one of many pillars, or many kind of mechanisms by which shamans cultivate otherness, both in the community's eyes and their own.
And we can see this, I guess, in like the cultural frame too, where cultures actually deploy certain taboos in order to create that otherness from other cultures. And like, this is us, this is our taboos, this is what we do. Um, yeah, I remember reading about taboos in my undergrad, and like how like when when you encounter those things in your world, like definitely investigate. And like, what is that? Like, why shouldn't I do this? Like, is it actually harmful, or is it made up, or what is it?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a whole discourse. I mean, like maybe this is slightly tangential, but the Mentawe are coming into contact with Abrahamic religions,
mhm.
and like Islam is coming in fast and hard. And there's a big discourse about like, what is the deal with the pig taboo? And people will say things like, well, a shaman cannot eat eel because if a shaman eats an eel, they will die. But all of us can eat pig. Like, why is the pig taboo such a big deal? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think taboo has big social weight, but I think it also like is something people have to often contend with. Um,
I love that example of the eel. It's a, perfect shaman logic, right? It's like exactly that. we don't we don't have like, because it's like it's not exactly like causal. It's like it's neurotoxic. Your brain's gonna go ill. It's like, there's like a lot behind that. And I see this
yeah,
in kind of like shamanic storytelling and logic in the
yeah.
Amazon and elsewhere too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So the in Mentawai, the Sikere, they're contrasted with normal humans who are called Simata. And
Mm.
Simata means it's also a word that refers to food that has not yet been cooked, like raw food, or fruit that is not yet ripe. So it has this implication of being immature, of not yet developing. And so there's this sense that Sikere are kind of matured, cooked individuals, but in cooking them, in maturing them, their essence has changed such that they can eat what are called uh, iba makatai, like evil food, bad food, rotten food. And these, it's more kind of on a spiritual sense. So eel is one of them. Another one is the white Simakobu monkey. So on Mentawai, Mentawai is really cool insofar as it has a lot of primates that you find nowhere else. And one of them is white and associated with ghosts. And Sikere shamans can't eat that. They can't eat flounders. Flounders are very weird fish. They're actually in Mentawai, they're called like cut in half fish. Yeah, so a lot of the things they can't eat are these things that are kind of like psychologically potent. They also can't eat gibbons. Um, and then there are a couple that still puzzle me. They can't eat like a certain kind of squirrel, which is everything else is like so kind of psychologically and spiritually potent. Eels, white monkeys, the gibbons, and then the squirrel kind of intrigues me.
And you
Um,
haven't been able to uncover like what their kind of story is around that.
I mean, in the moment, I'm forgetting. I'm wondering if they'll say like the squirrel's call sounds like maybe it's like a summon or a signal that someone's dying. But it's been a long time since I've interviewed people
Yeah.
about that.
And did you get to encounter things like possession in their traditions? Like, did that's a thing? And similarly, like a spirit right next to them talking, or like a sort of
Yeah,
divinations. Yeah.
yeah. So there are many ways in which the Sikere interact with spirits. The kind of paradigmatic or quintessential practice or treatment is called lajo simagre. And so this is when they'll cover their bodies in turmeric. They'll and then they'll go on a dance floor, and then someone will produce music, typically on reptile skin drums. So like a python skin drum or a monitor lizard skin drum. There will be a drumming, It has a particular beat.
Mhm.
And then the sikere, these shamans, will go on the dance floor, and then they will start tapping their feet. So they're adding a second layer of rhythm. And then they will dance, um, and they'll have feathers, they'll have beads, they'll have this turmeric, and all of that is understood to be very, very beautiful for the spirits, for people's souls and for good spirits. And then there's an understanding that these souls and spirits are flooding the dance floor.
Mm.
And then you'll start to see like observers falling into trance. Often women will then start entering trance. Um, and the trance the women enter is interesting. It's kind of like an enduring long trance. They might chant and go back and forth, but then the shamans will start to enter trance. It's called gobo. And I've had different, this kind of comes back to the fluid ways in which people describe trance. So some people will describe it, I've had it described to me as possession, but I've also had it described as like the spirits are near you and their energy is kind of coming into contact with you. They have a word bajo. So their bajo is pushing you into this state. Um, but then, yeah, they'll start dancing, and then one by one, several of them will fall into trance, and that's a sign that the spirits are there. And then after a while, the dance will kind of fall apart because a number of them have fallen into trance. People have to take care of them. They'll slowly be pulled out of trance, and then they'll dance again. They'll fall into trance, and that'll happen over and over and over. Um, and it's understood to be very curative and therapeutic. This is often in the context of a healing. And so the really important thing, connecting this with psychedelics, was that with the Mentawe, trance is induced totally by dancing and drumming and rhythm. I mean, they'll smoke tobacco, but everyone smokes tobacco, and it's not to a degree that's like excessive. So yeah, it's overwhelmingly induced through music. And what I noticed in leaving Mentawe, which is how I started to get into the whole like psychedelic discourse, is that when I would talk to people, they would just assume there is such a link in people's intuitive minds between shamanism around the world and psychoactive drugs, and in particular hallucinogens and psychedelics. Um, and I started to see that a lot of the claims that I was seeing about psychedelics and their link to shamanism, and their link to shamanism both historically and cross culturally, seemed to miss the boat. That there was often a misrepresentation of what shamanism looks like across cultures, and the history of psychedelics. And that is how I started to kind of enter this space more and more.
There's so many ways in which we can instantiate these non-ordinary states, and like the list is kind of endless almost. I think, like, is there an example of like, let's say, I'm trying to think of like negative examples. So like, so we have like positive examples that look just like shamanism. We got Shipibo shamanism. We've got like the assorted African diaspora religions. We got like, stuff all over the world that fits these kind of primary categories. But is there kind of like one that, I don't know, hyper commercial ayahuasca shamanism or something? Like, is there something that kind of like breaks the mold from these definitions?
Well, I mean, one thing I would say. So I guess there are two things there. So like ayahuasca shamanism, when people go and they say, they go take ayahuasca, and they take it with a specialist who gives them a psychedelic, looks nothing like shamanism almost anywhere in the world, for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, the biggest thing is that overwhelmingly in shamanic traditions, including those that include psychoactive substances, and in particular hallucinogens, and in particular serotonergic psychedelics, it is the specialist who is consuming the substance. It is like the intervention is often understood. The specialist is maybe consuming a substance or a medicine to engage with some unseen reality, and through that engagement treat the patient. Yeah, and so in that way, I guess my feeling about neo shamanism is both that, like, on the one hand, I think a lot of what people call shamanism doesn't look like a lot of shamanism, but on the other hand, there are a lot of neo shamans who are it's sometimes said, oh, that's not real shamanism. That, like, if you go to Burning Man, you go to Shaman Dome, and there are these dudes these people, they call themselves shamanistas. They're like drumming on a drum, and then they're going to the spirit world and treating people that's like not authentic shamanism. And if anything, I think that is shamanism. I think it's a very like peculiar form of shamanism. It's like one that's informed by the Western academic study of shamanism, and it's like roots itself in this like global story. um but I think that is shamanic, and like who am I to say that something is authentic or is not, insofar as it like embodies these key features, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, like it hits those 3 categories quite well. I stay the hell out of that area. Um, but, this idea of, yeah, like we're turning the customer client into the shaman. It's kind of interesting. And we kinda clearly know that in ayahuasca shamanism that usually the patients didn't drink anything or drank the lightest bit. Um, and it was the shaman's job to go into the other world.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and linked to that, just in terms of like claims that I think are sometimes a bit misrepresentation. You find so many of these claims that um like cultures around the world have been using serotonergic psychedelics in shamanic contexts for thousands of years. And my understanding, with the exception of Southern Africa, which is like very complicated and like we're discovering new things constantly. My PhD student has been going to Southern Africa to investigate. With the exception of Southern Africa, it looks like serotonergic psychedelics have been used in traditional contexts only in the Americas, like the Rio Grande area southwards, so like the native range of peyote and southwards. And even there, a very small proportion of societies, maybe 5% of societies in the Americas, were using serotonergic psychedelics, or at least we have evidence of that. Um, and so I think like this deep link between psychedelics and shamanism, although I think there are like important lessons to be drawn there, and a bunch of the psychedelics that are growing in popularity do have histories in shamanic contexts. I think it actually underplays the incredibly like diverse ways that humans have devised to tweak consciousness, if you know what I mean.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, that's fascinating. That's really fascinating. And you're right, like um, at home psychonauts are hitting a lot of these categories. Um, well, there's only 3 categories, and sometimes people come back with divinations or weird spirit contacts, or maybe we're gonna get rain now. Um, and that was just like the person smoking DMT on the couch in the suburbs, and it like looks really strange, but yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to just like how, I mean, my main thought here is that there is something so psychologically compelling about those 3 features tied together, that like we live in constant uncertainty. We live in a world of illness and, uncertain weather and uncertain economic events. And we also have this feeling, this conviction often, that this uncertainty is linked to some unseen agents and some unseen reality. And so what way is more compelling to humans of engaging with that unseen reality than to like put yourself in a different state? I think it's just that simple logic that is so attractive and so compelling, that leads shamanism to reemerge so easily and so reliably. And which is the reason that I call it a timeless tradition. I think like, more than um, a lot of the institutionalized religions, they will emerge, they will fall, but the incredible like psychological gravity and pull of the ecstatic as a way to engage with the beyond, I think, is a perennial human tendency.
And I guess in terms of like the popular uses these days of the term shamanism, like are you like you're clearly well aware of these debates, right? People calling themselves shamans, like you're not a real shaman. Like, is it is it helpful in popular culture to use this term? Like in terms of like I have Shipibo lineage and I'm a shaman. Like it feels kind of like let's pull from Siberia, and that makes it a little awkward. But also it's the term of art these days, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something I even struggled with in writing this book. Like, I want to describe a cross cultural phenomenon, the power of ecstasy or the ecstatic or the non ordinary as a way to engage with the beyond, and the fact that it's so often specialist. Do I use the term shaman?
Mhm.
And I think there are arguments in favor and against. In favor is the fact that, like, this is the term that's so often associated with this practice. Um, and do I want to just devise some new term like tranceism, trans practitionism, or something? On the other hand, of course, like the pushback I often get is, and I can go over some of it. Like you said, this is a term that is often associated with Siberia. It spread into Western European languages from Tungusic, from a Siberian language, and it also has so much baggage on it. It has, the associations that Mircea Eliade put on it of soul journeying and these different realms. It has a lot of primitivist imagery and primitivist associations. Um, but I think both of those criticisms are a bit complicated. On the one hand, yes, it entered like European languages from Siberia, but it may have entered Siberia from Sanskrit. And it has clearly continued to evolve since entering Western European languages. So I don't think it makes sense to treat, whatever 1600 as the authentic snapshot of the word, that what it referred to in that year is how we should use that term. I think like all concepts, it's evolving. I mean, we're even using the word taboo in this conversation. Taboo is a Polynesian word, but it has come to have a cross-cultural meaning beyond that. And then towards this other point that shaman has all of these complicated associations. I mean, a part of my goal with the book was to show that that this isn't, like I said, something that is like necessarily only archaic or Siberian or esoteric or remote, but instead something like timeless and perennial. So one of my goals was to try to get it beyond this imagery, and I mean, I did that also by like saying some things that some people have really pushed against. I argue that like a lot of the Hebrew prophets were shamans, as far as we can tell. That like some Pentecostal pastors are shamans. That like trance channelers are shamans that you might find in the streets of LA, and that the neo shamans that you see at Burning Man, for example, or that I used to visit in the Cambridge Shamanic Circle and the Quaker Lodge outside Harvard, are shamans, because all of these are exhibiting these really fundamental traits that we find over and over and over: the non-ordinary states, the engagement with the unseen, and services like healing and divination.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I was thinking about that, like contemporary evangelical Christianity is like, especially like the Pentecostal flavor, it can look very shamanic.
For
and-
sure, for
yeah.
sure. And like yeah, and this impulse to say that is not shamanism, or as soon as it's applied to Christianity, it stops being shamanism. I don't think it's like a valid one. I mean, if you saw that practice, if that practice was observed among some different religion in Korea, where you have, you know, ritual leaders, for example, who are talking to sky gods and entering these non-ordinary states and speaking in tongues and healing people, people would much more easily call that shamanism. I think just because it has a particular religious pedigree and history, people are a lot more apprehensive. And I don't think that's justifiable. I think like if you're going to call a practice in Korea, in Siberia, in the Amazon, in Indonesia shamanism, then you should let it describe whatever it's describing everywhere it recurs.
Right. If we're going to be consistent and intellectually honest, and um, yeah. So I love that framing. And assume you kind of saw Rick Strassman's book. What was it? DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, that kind of framed psychedelic use and prophecy in an interesting way, as part of the Abrahamic tradition.
Oh, interesting. No, I haven't. I haven't read it.
Yeah. I didn't love it, but I think it was an interesting take to say like the core of like Abrahamic faiths came from prophecy, like obviously, and then psychedelics as kind of prophetic agents in some cases, and I find that interesting. Um,
For sure. I
we
mean,
have the speculations around like huffing acacia smoke and maybe DMT and whatever else is going on there, but no
oh, so
real
the argument
evidence.
is that like early Hebrew prophets are using psychedelics.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
and that's very similar to prophecy as they understand it in the scripture, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the scripture, the way that prophecy is often described is very paradigmatically shamanic. It's like,
Mm.
they're behaving in these non-ordinary ways. in some instances, it even sounds like they're going on soul journeys. If we want to invoke Eliade, you know, the hand of the Lord is on my head, and I'm carried to the valley. Or it's often associated with music, and divination is what prophecy is. It's saying, you know, sharing opaque information from a divine source. Um, but it's interesting, this thing that you just described, where it's like, okay, we see all of these behaviors. It seems like they probably come from, or there's a good reason to think that is related to a serotonergic psychedelic. Is the kind of, honestly, like, I don't know the right word to describe this, or the right way to describe this, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but I think there's almost a lack of an imagination, or a lack of an appreciation for just all the ways that people have induced the non-ordinary and the mystical.
Hmm.
Something I've been thinking a lot about lately has been soma. You know, there's this big mystery supposedly about what soma is, and there's a lot of claims that soma was a psychedelic. But archaeologically and ethnographically, it really seems that soma was a stimulant. It was ephedra. Um, and I think in many cultures, people have used stimulants in mystical states. And I think we just, as a society in the West, have kind of forgotten that, like, the mystical does not have to be psychedelic and hallucinogenic. That an incredibly diverse ways of tweaking consciousness have been understood to be mystical. I mean, coffee is often understood to be mystical. Alcohol is in some contexts associated with shamanism. Tobacco is associated with shamanism. There's just this deep fixation on psychedelics and the hallucinogenic as the gateway to the ecstatic, which I think really underplays what the mystical can feel like.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. A few things here, like Carl Hart, kind of in a number of his books, kind of discusses that opium and like a lot of Persian traditions using opium look quite mystical, and we demonize the hell out of that. And I think there's a certain kind of function of the psychedelic culture trying to set itself apart by ignoring certain parts of history and anthropology. And then there's a historical figure of the psychedelic counterculture, Neil Cassidy, who is really an amphetamine enthusiast, and he was, you know, a really important figure for people like Jerry Garcia, and I think he came out of the Beat generation. He's kind of like Jack Kerouac kind of era person, if I'm not mistaken. So there's all sorts of interesting stuff there, and I forget sometimes about how impactful stimulants can be, because you know, you're tired, you're hanging out, you slept kind of poorly, and then all of a sudden you take this superhuman thing and you can become a little bit more than you were earlier that morning, or at least radically different.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. I mean, you read the Rig Veda, I could pull up passages, but like, it's often like he took Soma and that gave Indra the power to defeat the serpent. That gave him the power to like pull apart the worlds. It's so often associated with like incredible feats. Just coming back to the sense of like, it makes you feel like you can do things you otherwise could not.
that's it's like a weird I love this. It's like it feels naughty, so it's like hitting a taboo for me, which I think is fucking kind of hilarious right now. um
Wait, what do you mean?
Oh, because so like Rig Veda, like the idea of Rig Veda being kind of like theoretically from ephedra is fucking hilarious and amazing, and like like possibly quite true. It's like a far more obvious thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Um,
described as a press plant. Its effects are overwhelmingly like those of a stimulant. If you
mhm.
look at substances that are etymologically related, so there's homa in related traditions. Homa is very often ephedra. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the evidence for why it's a mushroom, and in particular something like a psilocybin mushroom, it's incredibly thin. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
fuck yeah, of course, of course. And I've read the Rock Wasson book, Road to Eleusis. It's like radically speculative. I think you probably saw the academic article, kind of like taking down their
Yeah,
argument,
the
and
newer
the
one.
yeah, and what's his name, Brian Murarescu's kind of like interesting attempt at an argument, like certainly not academic, but you know, very popular. It changed a lot of minds. Um, and I'm still battling it. Like that it's not necessarily, this isn't the real thing. This is like a great story, but it's not like hard evidence. And I wanted to like circle back to something you said earlier about the potential Sanskrit precursor to shaman,
Okay, yeah,
in terms of like a
Sraman.
word. Yeah,
Yeah.
what do we have there?
Yeah, so my pronunciation, I would have to look up exactly how you pronounce it. Maybe it's something like Shraman or Sramana.
Mm,
I think it meant priest or monk, something like that. And the idea is that I think it spread into Central Asia, possibly with Buddhist monks. Um, but this is like etymological reconstruction that far back gets a
right.
bit shaky. Um,
That makes sense. And I think the idea that people didn't travel from south to north ever, seems a little flaky. Yeah, so I think why not? Totally, why not? I think that's an interesting concept. Um, especially with like how much culture kind of emanated from India, like long time ago. And then circling back to Eleusis here, I chatted with a lot of people recently about Eleusis and this concept of like we have to justify what we're doing today by making it really old.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, I feel like that is what I'm often pushing against, and what I'm partly pushing against at parts in this book. Yeah, there's this yeah, there's this real sense among many psychedelics enthusiasts that to justify this or to make it appealing, we have to kind of connect it to some global psychedelic religion, that it softens the edges, that it makes it less scary. And I think that does a real disservice to our understanding of human diversity, to our understanding of shamanism, of religion, of human history. Um, and at the same time, like there are groups that use serotonergic psychedelics, apparently in traditional contexts, that have been doing it for a while. And I think also by like linking modern usage, especially in like psychedelic or psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, by rooting that in this like supposedly indigenous worldview, you also blind yourselves to the really interesting, or one blinds themselves to the really interesting ways in which groups do use psychedelics and all of the like really fascinating psychopharmacology that they've developed. So like with my colleague Sandeep Nayak, who he's a professor at Hopkins, we've been going to Colombia and visiting some of these groups that use yopo, and you find an incredibly interesting diversity of usage. You find like mystical apprenticeships where a shaman and a non-shaman will have years of use of yopo, where they will use it to experience the beyond and think about it and discuss it. You have groups like the Pume in Venezuela, where like all adult men every third night will take several blasts of yopo and dance. You
mm,
have you have groups like various Tucanoan groups who, as a group, would take ayahuasca or something similar to ayahuasca, where there's an MAOI and some source of DMT, and then they would travel to the Milky Way. And each of these groups has whole discourses about what are the effects, how do you manage it, how do you manage dose with history. And yeah, I think like by continuing to exist or insist or claim that the particular usage that appears in trials, or which people are trying to sell, is an echo of some ancient and widespread use, really misrepresents all of the like actually useful and interesting information about indigenous use in those places where there does seem to be a history of psychedelics, if you know what I mean.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. And so there's this really interesting story I just heard yesterday. I'm kind of like interested in the Western esoteric tradition, right? Like these manuscripts, Rosicrucians, magic alchemy, etc., and kind of like plays into a lot of things that psychedelia is sitting with these days. And there was this um, newish book. I'm not going to cite it or anything, but like the idea is that this is kind of like an unbroken chain of manuscripts and ideas, from ancient Greece and before, and the the discovery was that somebody 1400s 1500s like hired a Jewish magician, and they were kind of, this other person was kind of like a scribe and kind of a magician of their own right, and they just kind of like merged things and made like some sort of manuscript that became like the template for the next couple hundred years of this theme of
Yeah.
manuscript. And it was like really fascinating to like hear some people who were like really deep in that tradition, really like believed in it and cared about that kind of like unbroken chain, and they're just like their heart collapsed. But it's like, you're still hitting these three categories of things, like the NOSCs, the services, the unseen world, and it's like, it's fascinating to me, and I think I'm interested in that whole field because it kind of like shows that yes, this stuff was happening in Europe. It didn't necessarily always have to be drugs. There could have been other things, but there could have been drugs. There could have been plants.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I mean, plants. I'm often pushing against serotonergic psychedelics because they're talked about so much, but it's definitely the case that like plants are often involved and in interesting ways.
Right. Like daturas, like mandrake. There's all sorts of like
Yeah,
really sketchy plants that they would use that are super dangerous. It's not that like they weren't using dangerous things that weren't serotonergic. It's just, you know, and they could have been doing all sorts of things like fasting for 40 days plus or whatever, you know. In a monastery, there's a lot of room for experimentation.
yeah. For sure, for sure. Um,
Yeah. So, what were like for you kind of the most surprising things or challenging concepts as you were kind of working through this book?
Challenging. What do you mean challenging?
Intellectually challenging just to piece together and or challenging for pop culture.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'll tell you something that I'm often trying to work with.
Hmm.
Um, so there's something like just building on what we're talking about. If we use soma as an example, let's say like the evidence suggests that soma is not a psychedelic and is instead a stimulant, but the story of it being a psychedelic is like very rich and kind of beautiful and interesting and so something a challenge sometimes is like, how do you be deflationary but still invoke or evoke wonder? Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean? Like, how do you say
Hmm.
that like, well, in fact, only a minority of the world's cultures have used psychedelics, but that's like nevertheless still interesting and wondrous, because I think like so much of the discourse
Yeah.
finds wondrousness in history and in diversity through psychedelics as a lens, and like trying to see wonder in that I think has been a really useful exercise. Like that is what kind of gave me an appreciation for the ways in which we no longer appreciate stimulants as ways to get into the divine, or the larger kind of underappreciation um for the many like methods that people have used to discover non-ordinary states. So I think that's just like the project of being deflationary but nevertheless finding wonder. I found a really kind of like useful exercise in this kind of work, and I think that's something that like a lot of academics have to contend with and maybe often don't do well enough, because I think like there's some stories that succeed because they are interesting and cool and rich and like narratively compelling, and I think some scholars sometimes try to push against them, but they don't have the story to replace it with. Like I'm thinking of Graham Hancock. Like in
Hmm.
whatever corner of Twitter I'm on is a lot of people who like grumble about how Graham Hancock really misrepresents archaeology and history. But I think the people they're talking to often don't care about the facts; they care about the story. And so I think that the thing that you often have to do is like, how can you build stories, build narratives that feel as compelling and rich as the ones you're trying to replace?
That's going to be a forever problem with Graham. I don't, I don't think academics can, like, generally speaking, tell such a compelling story, right? Um, so I want to kind of double up on your kind of wonder and deflation story, because a lot of our work here at Psychedelics Today is not about psychedelics, it's about holotropic breath work and things in that lineage, where it's about group and music and body
Yeah,
and how it makes the human body a little bit more wondrous that we can do these things
yeah,
without substance.
yeah,
It's already there. You're the
yeah,
like the kind of thing I was saying is that you're the magical thing.
yeah.
Like how amazing is that you're already magical without it? You just have to try.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that. So, like, and another thing I write about in the book is about like the question of how old shamanism is.
Mm,
And so to answer that, one of the things people look at is rock art. And there are these things called therianthropes, which are like human animal hybrids.
yeah.
So there's a
I
very
laugh
big
because of the Graham Hancock link, and that's one of his kind of deals that he loves to get into.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I honestly have not read enough Graham Hancock to like even know what's a trigger or what's relevant to him. But so yeah, so I visited one of these caves where you have these therianthropes. And like my honest appraisal is like, who knows if that's related to shamanism. But I think by like insisting that it is, we are kind of similar to what you're saying. We underplay like human imagination and human creativity and like the things that the places human minds can go to like often. Oh yeah, we need hallucinogens or psychedelics or plants or even trance to like think about the wondrousness and the imaginative. I think does a real disservice to just like humans. Um, yeah. So
Mhm.
just to say that that's something that's yeah. I mean, I think that actually links to like a lot of the claims that are made about psychedelics when psychedelics as the origins of religion, I think also similarly does a disservice to like the human capacity for religion and the human capacity to feel kind of divine presence.
Right. Absolutely. Like, does it also like devalue music in an interesting way? I
Yeah.
think there's a lot here.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the things that humanity is expressing does become devalued when we're saying it's only with drugs.
Yes, yes, for
It's
sure. I
like,
mean, like the healing ceremonies I've seen in Mentawai are so rich and evocative and like transporting. It's just the social presence, the like it's a collaboration among so many people to create an incredibly kind of immersive healing environment. You have people drumming, you have other people who are heating the drums, you have the shamans who are dancing, you have observers who are falling into trance. And all of that is giving the patient, the client, some sense that whatever source of affliction is being contended with. Um, yeah, yeah. And so to boil that down to a drug, I think like really ignores all of the cool ways that humans have devised to transport ourselves.
mm. So people should obviously read your book, but like if they want to go beyond your book and want to kind of understand shamanism a little bit, more deeply in different ways that maybe you don't cover, like who are some authors or books you might recommend beyond yours?
Yeah, so of course I think my book is like the best. Or no, I mean I think it's a great introduction. Um,
Hmm.
but if I were to recommend like where you should go, I think I would really emphasize going straight to the ethnographies. So there's this book Boiling Energy by
Mm.
I believe the first name is Richard Katz about trans healing among the Kalahari Kung. Um, and so, that's a tradition. The Kalahari Kung are like hunter gatherers, former hunter gatherers who lived in like Namibia and Botswana. And Richard Katz did a deep study of just their trance healing practice. There are like chapters, entire biographies of particular healers. I think that's a great book. I think the Catalpa Bow about shamanism in Japan is a really great book. I think The Fallen Sky by Davi Kopenawa and Bruce Alpert. So this is a collaboration between a Yanomama shaman and a French anthropologist. It's like an autobiography of this Yanomama shaman, but I think that's an incredibly powerful book. And I think the footnotes are like a great lens or perspective into the Yanomama worldview. Um,
Is
yeah,
there
I mean,
anything around like pre-Hindu shamanism, like pre kind of like whatever like
yeah,
came
like
before?
Indo-Iranian.
Right, right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes
Well,
sense.
yeah. So I mean, I have a separate like total obsession and fascination with like Proto-Indo-European, the early Indo-European traditions. And so there's this great
So
book.
like proto-Zoroastrian kind of traditions, or
Well, yeah, so it's so the Indo-European language family. So
Mhm.
that's like Germanic, German, whatever, English, um, Norwegian, Swedish, Icelandic, but then all the Italic languages, so all the Romance languages, all the Slavic languages, all the Baltic languages, but then also Iranian languages, and then also Northern European languages. All of these come from a single language called Proto-Indo-European that was spoken probably on the steppe in
Mhm.
Ukraine, north of the Black Sea. And so we've done, you can, the story essentially is that these steppe peoples who lived north of the Black Sea had horses and were like pretty warriorish, and then came to just like spread and conquer, or at least spread throughout much of Europe, Iran. Central Asia, and then northern India. And you can get like a good lens into their worldview through texts like the Rig Veda or the Homeric epics or the early Zoroastrian texts like the Avesta. Um, that's all to say that, so there are some really great books about the religious worldview of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, where people have like, through comparing texts like the old Zoroastrian texts and the Rig Veda and the Homeric epics, you can get a sense of what the mythology and religious practices of these people looked like. And in there, you can also get a rough sense of what some of the shamanism looked like. So a great book on that is Martin West's, I think it's called Indo-European Poetry and Mythology, or Indo-European Myth and Poetry, something like that, but by Martin West. That's a pretty scholarly book, and it's like a lot of like, this is what the Rig Veda says, this is what, like, this passage of Homer says, this is like what, this passage of this book of the Avesta says. But I think it's an incredibly cool book, because I think the fact that we have reconstructed this world from 5,000 years ago is super, super cool.
Right. Absolutely. And it's we're I guess finally at a moment with all these ancient texts and scholarship where we can do these analyses. Like I remember, I don't know why, but I was studying the Bible a bunch in my undergrad, and I was like, oh, all these different kind of texts informed like this particular edition that made it here and here and here.
Yes.
And like,
yes.
You could kind of like track down missing manuscripts. And yeah, I love that kind of analysis of like there being, a sort of kind of proto-culture that informed all these other things that are still around today. And yeah, the idea of the same thing that informed the Rig Veda informing Homer is really interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's good reason to think that Indra, Thor, Zeus, Jupiter all partly come from the same god, from god Perquenos, a big red-bearded thunder god who drank a lot, got in a lot of fights, defeated a serpent, was a bit rambunctious. Yeah, no, I think it's super, super cool. We know there was probably a dog named something like Kerberos who, looked over the underworld. There was probably a figure who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Yeah, it's super cool.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm just thinking about Zeus's misbehavior, but also his like kind of figurehead as king. I'm like,
yeah,
it's fascinating.
Yeah, Zeus is an interesting figure. Zeus and Jupiter are interesting figures because they actually seem potentially like fusions of two Proto-Indo-European gods. There's like Deus Pater, the Sky Father, Deus Pater, which manifests then in Zeus Pater, and Jupiter. Jupiter is just like a fusion of essentially Sky and Father. So the Sky Father became fused with the Thunder God in Jupiter and in Zeus.
Wild. And oh gosh, we could go on so many fun tangents now, but I was really wanting to read what Charles Stang is working on around proto-Mithraism. I think like proto-solar cults in that particular area. I don't know when that is going to come out, but I'm hopeful that I can get him on to chat about that and how that might inform kind of an interesting kind of larger, I don't know, expanding the scope of psychedelic conversations beyond drugs.
Yeah. That sounds super cool. I did not know he's working on that.
Yeah, I think that's what he said. Proto-Mithra. Yeah, that sounds right. It was well over a year ago that he told me that. So hopefully my memory's right. But yeah, so I think the takeaways are, this like the three things that make up this thing that our shamanism is: non-ordinary states, unseen world, and services like divination and healing. And I think that's really important for us to take away here as we get a little sometimes inflated over what is and is not shamanism. And like, maybe that's not the fight that we want to make.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a point that I like to make is that like all shamanic traditions are dynamic and changing and like adapting and, importing influences. And so this idea that like, for instance, just to choose one example, neo-shamanism is like not is some newfangled modern form of shamanism, and it contrasts with so-called traditional shamanism. I think like is diluted. I mean, all shamanisms are constantly evolving, and that's something I learned and recognized working with the Mentawai, because like so much of what characterizes Mentawai shamanism, the Sikere, came in from contact with outsiders. They have bells that seem to have come in from trade with the Dutch. They wear dance skirts. They covered themselves in beads. All of these came in from the outside world. So what looks like very traditional shamanism is actually just as like much a product of globalization and colonialism as some of these like so-called newer forms of shamanism.
Yeah, I think I heard somebody I respect recently saying like all of like this cultural development stuff is kind of like not all of it's just like the most disgusting of colonialism. Like a lot of it's just kind of natural humanity, um, like being kind of like a scavenger bird. Like let me take that. That looks good. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
for
this
sure.
just
I mean,
looks all
humans
right. Let
are
me try that.
humans are constant remixers.
Right, and I was hearing recently that some of the traditions in like Brazil were taking some of the European kind of manuscripts and integrating that into their kind of like traditional practice, like kind of African diaspora traditional practice. Like fascinating to know that it's still evolving. Um, and I think that's the thing. Everything's just going to keep changing and moving around. And now, thank you. I have kind of a good foundation for going forward. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So where can folks find your book?
Yeah, so my book should hopefully be in most stores, and then you can also get it on like most web platforms, Amazon, bookshop.org. You can get it on Audible. If you do read it, I hope you enjoy it and like recommend it to someone, but also consider rating and reviewing because I increasingly really recognize how important that is for just helping find readers. But yeah, I hope people get it, and I hope they enjoy it. And if they do enjoy it, they should feel free to reach out to me.
I love that. All right. Well, I tragically only got a few chapters in, and I wish I got through the whole thing, but soon enough. So thank you, Manvir, for being here. I hope we can check in again in the future, and good luck with the book.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Joe. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.